want to talk to you about three very important vocabulary words when we start comparing numbers and measurements. Okay, so let's talk about this first one right here, ratio. You're familiar with that. It's a comparison of two quantities. And we've been talking about rational numbers for a long time. You know, they're numbers that can be written as fractions, two numbers, A over B, where B is not zero. So if I just wrote out a numerical value where I was comparing two numbers, remember that there are several ways that you can write those ratios out. If I say there's a comparison of 20 girls in the room compared to 30 boys in the room, so that'd be 20 to 30. And I could write that as a fraction, 20 over 30. Or I could write it using colons, 20 to 30, okay? I could even write it using the word 2, 20 to 30. Very numerical, all right? Ratio, a comparison of two quantities. When we start talking about measurements and using numbers that have units on them, it's really important to know that you've got some special ratios. And the vocabulary that goes along with that is important to understand, know, and to be able to use. A rate is a comparison of two quantities with different units. So really a rate is a special type of ratio. For example, if I get in my car and I drive for 2 hours and I go 140 miles, I could write that I'll have 140 miles to 2 hours. And that's a comparison of two different numbers, but they have different units on them. You know, miles is a unit that measures distance. Hours is a unit that measures time. And again, with these rates, I could write them the same way that I write ratios. I could write it as 140 miles over 2 hours. I could write it with the colon. I could write it with the word 2. A rate, it compares two quantities and they have different units. A unit rate is a special type of rate, which is also a ratio. Look at the definition of it. It's a special rate, a ratio that compares a measurement of a quantity to one unit of something else. So a good rule of thumb to remember with that is a unit rate has a denominator of 1. So let's just kind of use this same example over here of the rate of 140 miles in 2 hours. If I wrote that as 140 miles over 2 hours, I essentially could just simplify that fraction. 140 and 2 are both even numbers, and I could divide those down to 70 miles over 1 hour. This is called a unit rate because it's comparing quantities that have two different measurements of units, or units of measurements right there. And then the denominator is 1. It's compared to 1 unit of something else. All of these are ratios. They're just some that are special. And I want you to be familiar with all of the terminology around them.